And so thank you all for being here, both our panelists and for our students. So in this session, this is our final session for our school showcase, and you'll be hearing from current graduate students about what it's like to be a grad student. So here's our list of panelists today, and I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves in just a moment. You'll see that we have some master's students and doctoral students, and we also have most everyone's from health psychology, but we also have someone from the counseling program. So I will let you guys, whoever wants to start can start if you want to just introduce yourself. So tell us who you are, which program you're in, and what year you are. If you want to share a little bit about your research interests or practice interests, and then what you plan to do with your degree after you graduate.
Sure, I'll start. My name is Ameante, and I am a first year in the clinical health psychology program. I work with Dr. Bennett, and my interest is in the intersection between psychology and physiology. So really about measuring your body as well as correlating that with some psychological measures. I plan to, hopefully, after I graduate, to either work as a researcher and continue to develop work in this area, but also work in the clinical world where I see patients and do assessments.
I can go next. I'm Rachel. I'm a third year in the Health Psychology Ph.D. program, specifically in the community concentration. And I'd be happy to talk about those differences if folks have questions about what that means. Research and practice interests. So I have a lot of research interests, but I guess to narrow them down, I'm really interested in using community-based participatory research practices to inform research and evaluation, generally to promote well-being, community well-being, like very broadly defined. But one of my current research projects that I'm working on with Clysha is doing qualitative interviews with residents in Charlotte about their experiences of safety and violence and how that impacts their health. After graduation, I am still figuring that out a little bit, even here in my third year, but I am interested in going into policy and using research to inform policy.
I can go next. My name is Tanya Fuentes. I am in the counseling program. This is my second year, so I'll be graduating in May. And I'm actually on the school counseling track. And so there's three different ones. There's clinical mental health, school counseling, and then addictions. And then what do I plan to do after I graduate? Hopefully working as a high school counselor.
I'll go next. So my name is Clysha, and I'm in the health psychology program as well, and a first year in the community concentration. And my research interests are around health disparities, and as of lately been really interested in addressing like the structural root causes of health disparities through implementing community-based programming. And what I plan to do after graduation, it's similar to, I don't know, but I hope to work in a community setting in some fashion, whether it be through local government, nonprofits, and implement these types of practices.
I guess I'm left. My name is Sophie. I'm currently in the MA in psychology, and I will start the PhD in health psychology next semester. My research interests right now are kind of within sleep and immunity, like any like biomarkers of inflammation, how sleep impacts them. And after graduation, I'm not sure yet. I could see myself staying in academia. I could see myself doing something else. So we'll just see when the time comes closer.
Wonderful. So thank all of you for introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit about you. So what we'll do next, so I do want all of our current undergrad students to have plenty of time to ask questions to our grad students. So I'll get us started with a few questions, but if you all have your own questions that you want to ask, feel free to use that chat feature, or you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask those there. So the first question that we'll pose to our graduate students is describe a little bit how graduate school is different than undergraduate.
I can go. I'll say I love being in grad school because you're specializing in what you're interested in. So all of your classes are about that subject, and you're just learning so much about the topic that you love or you're passionate about. Also, it's definitely more reading and writing than I experienced as an undergrad. You definitely have to come to class prepared with, all the readings that you had for the week. And you're having to write more. In counseling, we do a lot of reflections. So just kind of getting your thoughts on paper. Also, I would say like the classes are much more discussion based, whereas, you, at least in our department, you don't really expect to come in and see a professor with like a PowerPoint. It's usually like we're going to talk about what we read, the content, our thoughts about it, how we're feeling about it. So to me, that's been the biggest difference. And also you get hands-on experience. We do a 1.5 years of internship. So you're getting to actually practice what you're learning, which is super cool.
Yeah, and I would really emphasize that there's a lot more reading. Since I just started grad school not even a year ago, I was kind of surprised how much more reading it'll be. But you have so much liberty with everything you do. So far from the classes I had, I could fully choose my own personal direction I wanted to go in with my final papers and my projects. So it was just like more like you do what you want to do as long as it fits in the area, which is really refreshing, not given topics to write about.
Yeah, I second everything that was just said. And I think another area of difference between the undergraduate and graduate school is that you have to develop breadth and depth in the specific area that you are in order to develop research questions to bring new information to that field. So you have to know sufficient amount of information about what everyone else knows, and then on top of that, have an area of inquiry that you want to develop so you can pursue that in the research context.
Yeah, just to echo off of everybody, and I think it's like that critical thinking level shoots up where they're really, I mean, at every turn, really trying to challenge your thinking and your development. So yeah.
And I think, at least for me, the lifestyle felt a little bit different in that undergrad, it felt almost like this like fun community that I was a part of, and grad school feels a lot more like a professional job, in my opinion, where you may live with a partner at this point or a roommate or by yourself, but then you're going to school to do your job because at least in some programs you are paid for being in grad school. And so it is almost a professional occupation. And so that just makes it feel a little bit different than undergrad, where it feels more like, woohoo, I'm here in this community.
Awesome. And I think for any of the students who have been kind of tuning into some of these sessions throughout this week and last week, a lot of what you're hearing from the grad students are probably things that have sort of been touched on throughout some of these other sessions. And now we'll hear from our grad students about what do they wish that they would have known before they started. So kind of like advice that if they could go back and give themselves, what would you tell yourself?
I think that the mentor or advisor student relationship is really important. Your advisor in grad school is someone who usually is someone who you're applying to work with at the start of your program, and you work with them and work on their research projects the entire time. And so thinking really critically about if you've had, supervisors or mentors before, the types of people who you gel with and the types of people who maybe you work well with, but you don't want to be your close advisor for the next, 4 to 5 years. I would have given that more weight if I would tell myself to give that more weight if I was to go back and make that decision again. I think the other thing is to think about, especially if you're applying to PhD programs, those should be fully funded, and to look into whether that funding is 9 versus 12 months, and whether that funding with your specific supervisor or mentor is going to be grant funded or funded in a different way, because that will be a big deciding factor in how much research you're doing out starting in your first year versus potentially other funding mechanisms like being a teaching assistant or doing something else on campus.
I would kind of just, oh, I'm sorry. I would kind of just suggest, like, at a personal level, like for me, I moved to Charlotte, didn't know anyone, moved in with my boyfriend, classes were online, and just grad school is a lot more work and there's a lot more pressure. And also, I'm from Germany, so my family is also far away. So I felt very alone at the beginning of grad school, given that it was an online format, and it may or may not be that way next semester too. So if that would be the case, I would just say, like, trying to have these connections going into grad school, because there will be certain pressures that you can just not let out over the phone with someone. So like having a network and building a network, even if it's like in a way superficial and new, you know, like not as deep yet, it's just good to have people to talk about that go through the same stuff as you do.
I would say for me personally, the coming to graduate school after taking some time between my undergraduate and my graduate school, so if there's anyone out there like that, is having to relearn the academic software that people use online, in addition to the fact that we're all using Zoom now. And so having to navigate, relearn the stats, what kind of stat program does your department uses, and to make sure that you are at a sufficiently comfortable level that when you are asked to do some type of analyses, that they're pretty fresh in your mind and you're able to navigate the software.
I would say that I look into the courses and the curriculum. For me, I was just like excited to apply to grad school and become a school counselor that I didn't even look at the curriculum, like the actual classes that I would be taking. So when I saw like research pop up in my schedule, I was like, research. I know y'all are all researchers, but I have a hard time with research. So I kind of wish I would have gotten to know exactly all my classes that I was supposed to be taking, so that I can kind of like mentally prepare myself and also academically prepare myself. I could have maybe looked over research, because I didn't go straight into grad school. I took like a 6-year hiatus from school. And then I was like, how do you do research again? Like, I know I did it senior year of like being an undergrad majoring in psychology, but it had been such a long time. So maybe refreshing yourself and getting to know the curriculum like really well, because you're going to live by it for the next two to 3 years or 5 years.
Yeah, and I would say too, maybe familiarize yourself with academic writing, in terms of like, or reading academic journals for leisure, to just get comfortable with having to read that type of material on a daily basis, maybe before the summer, like the summer before you go. Or if you're thinking about graduate school, just see how you like, you know, yeah, reading those on a regular basis to get yourself acquainted. Because when you get here, it can seem overwhelming that it's like, oh, I have 6 20-page articles to read, and I have to break them down and understand. So like getting practice doing that, like when you read the article, if you can say what it was about, say the methods they use, kind of orient yourself. I know it sounds like extra work, but I think it's good. It's a good way to prepare you for what you're going to have to do on a regular basis.
Awesome. And I like that everybody had, kind of different things to share and different advice that they would give to students who are thinking about graduate school. So our next question is for our grad students is, what factors do you think will make students a most competitive applicant? So you can think about yourself, or if you have other thoughts that have kind of entered your mind now that you are a grad student, you can share those as well.
I think partly this really depends on what type of program you're applying to. So like what Tanya pointed out was she's applying to a program for school counseling. So for that program, that, having a lot of research experience may not make her a more competitive applicant. So I do want to like put that caveat out there that what I say may not be applicable to your programs, but at least for our health psychology program, definitely having research experience is helpful. And so that you can speak to that experience, I think. I think that this maybe isn't a factor, but I think it helps to email the professor that you're applying to work with ahead of time prior to you send in your application, you know, like trying to create some type of personal connection with the program that you're applying to can just help elevate your application, especially when they're getting, you know, 400 or 500 applications in that cycle.
I can speak on behalf of the counseling department. I would say one thing that they really value in applicants is kind of like having a lot of self-awareness, because that's a big part of counseling, is being self-aware, and like your willingness to grow and learn, but also like undo parts of yourself, if that makes sense. It's a lot of like introspection and kind of digging deep to very uncomfortable parts. So they need to know that someone's willing to go there. Also, I would personally say like kind of like a life or global experience. I was living in a couple of countries before applying to grad school, and when I had my interview, they were super impressed by that. To them, it showed like adaptability. So that was really cool. And also a passion for what you're doing. You know, in counseling, we're very big on like social advocacy and like just social justice. So just kind of, if that's your niche, then I definitely think like the UNCC counseling department is the right department for you. So they're very big on that. And they actually, I've been told by a professor, like they look out for that too when they're looking at candidates.
And also if the school you're interested in has events, like networking events, to try to, like from the graduate office, they'll have admissions events or networking events, or maybe pipeline. Your college might do a hosting event to connect with the other college. And so attending stuff like that, I know for example, where I went to school for my master's program had a pipeline where they were trying to increase HBCU graduates to apply for PhD programs. And one of those pipeline programs was at UNC Charlotte, and I attended that event. And that was just another way to connect and make that personal connection to the people I wanted to apply to. So when the application came, they kind of remembered me.
Yeah, and I would say too, in addition to not only having like a personal connection with the school or making a personal connection with a potential advisor, it would make you competitive if you can show that you have pursued interest in your field outside of the academic world. So you have volunteered, or you have interned, or you have shadowed a professional who has a career that you want to pursue. So it shows that you have initiative and you are resourceful and you're committed to the field of study. So it is important to not only have that research background, but also have that applied experience. And that will make you a very competitive applicant.
I just found it helpful, like when I applied just now for the PhD, I found it very helpful referencing to the biopsychosocial model, and really like Ameante just said, like really showing that you're passionate for what you're going for. And then especially for UNCC, that would be this interdisciplinary between health psych and psychology. Well, I found for the MA, I could be a little broader about it, just because I entered the program being like, I like a lot of things and I would be interested in looking at a lot of things. But then for the health psychology, I was a lot more, I really want to go into this direction where I want to integrate different parts I'm interested in. But it's kind of what everyone said, just yeah.
Awesome. So definitely, you know, the passion for your field and why you're interested. We talked about research and just other types of experiences that you can have that will make you be a competitive applicant. All right. So our next question, and for our students who maybe are close to or thinking about applying in the next year or so. So how did you guys decide which programs that you wanted to apply to?
going to my master's program, it kind of specialized what I wanted to do. So when I knew I wanted to do community psychology, and I knew I liked health disparities, I only looked at places that had community psychology programs and professors that were doing work in health disparities are related to those areas. And even if it was a community psychology program, if it didn't have my research interests, I didn't apply. And now, granted, that's not the only way to do it. To me, it just felt more like if I get accepted, and so say if I got accepted to a child program, and I would have to figure out how to fit my interests into there instead of just knowing off the gate, everybody I apply to, I can directly fit my interests in, and it works for me. So yeah.
I did a very similar way to ask what Clysha said, because I have a very specific interest of like the interdisciplinary, where I'm connecting both like physiology and psychology and like immunology. It's a very like rare mix. So what I had to do was I looked for people who were producing research in those areas. And then from there, I looked at what programs they were in. And then from there, I looked at the schools. So first I went to the research, and then I had to broaden. And that's how I was able to broaden where I applied to. I did not start with a specific program in mind from a specific school. I looked at the type of research that they were producing.
I think one thing that helped me in the process of deciding what programs to apply to is that at least for me, I didn't go straight from undergrad to grad school, and taking time off and working helped me figure out, okay, this is the very narrow niche that I want to pursue in graduate school. So then I could narrow down to kind of then look at professors or research the way Ameante and Clysha are talking about it. The other thing that I would say that maybe I wish I had done a little bit more in making this decision, and that I think Sophie touched on, was when you are applying to graduate school programs, not only making sure that they, you know, like what Clysha said, that you have a professor there who you'd like to work with, or that they're doing research you'd like to do if you are pursuing a degree in research, is to make sure that where you're applying, the city that it will be is somewhere that you could see yourself living, because depending on the program, it could be anywhere between like 2 to 8 years that you'll be there. So if it is going to be closer to 8 years, then you probably want to make sure you could see yourself living in that city.
Maybe I can speak to people right now that feel like they're behind in the application process. But for me, the reason, well, I wanted to go to UNC Charlotte and get into their health psychology program. That was like my plan. But I was going to take a year off, do a year of OPT, work in the US for a year, and then exactly figure out what I want to do. And then COVID happened. Obviously, I could not find a job, especially as an international. It was a mess. So right before the deadline approached, I emailed my now advisor. I was like, is there any way I can still join BMA? I understand it's way too late for the PhD. So I joined BMA, had a great experience, and was fully convinced that I will do the PhD right away. So that's how I started applying for that. But if anyone feels like they're behind right now, given that the MA application deadline is coming up, I submitted my application, I think the very last day possible, and it's doable even if you're behind.
Yeah, I'll say I looked at different programs before applying, and I just really liked that UNC Charlotte, the counseling program, had a very big emphasis on like social justice and advocacy. So kind of looking through different websites, I was like, I think definitely this is the one. And also I'm originally from Charlotte. So I was like, oh, you know, I have family here. I wouldn't have to pay housing while I'm in grad school, so that I can just focus and get it, you know, knock it out and just get it done. But also I like that the like the counseling program at UNC Charlotte, you do get the classes that you need, your KCREP certified, so that if you want to be a school counselor, you can still become a clinical mental health counselor as well. So they allow for that dynamic, whereas some other programs might be very much more just school specific. and you don't really get that option as much. So that's something to look into if you're interested in school.
And I will say a quick caveat about the websites. When I would be looking for school, if your website was not up to date or at least looked like you updated within the last year, I wouldn't even consider the program. And that might be a little too harsh, but to me, sometimes it scares me that you don't keep your website up to date, because that may mean that there's a lot of chaos going on within the program that you then are going to be a part of. And I will give my master's program, their website was not up to par, but I went for it anyway. And it was exactly what I thought. And it was chaos, and I had to be a part of that chaos. And granted, good experience, learned a lot, but it would have been, I would have picked another program if hindsight. So.
And the other thing I would add is when I talked before about emailing professors to like make that initial point of contact, you can also ask, especially, you can also ask them if they're accepting students that year, if it's a program where you need to apply to work with a professor. So that also helped me narrow down my selection of programs, is that some professors said no, they weren't accepting students. So I would either have to wait an additional year or work with a different professor. So often I just cross that school off my list.
So thank you all for sharing, and I think we heard some similarities and also some differences in how people kind of approached applying for programs. And I also really appreciated that Tanya and Rachel and Clysha, that you guys also kind of touched on some others. So beyond just the research, with things like what does the website look like, or do I have family in the area, or do I want to live in this area? So those are all important things too. You have to really think about what's important to you personally, right? And maybe of course you want to go to a good program and things like that, but there may be other things in your life that might also be really important that you want to think about before you commit to a particular school. And so here we have a question for, I think we have 3 of you who had a master's before, and I may be wrong, who are currently in a PhD program. So for those students, I want you guys to talk about what are the biggest differences between the master's and the PhD program.
So I had a master's before I started my PhD program, and this is alluding to what we said about knowing where you want to live. I got my master's from Minnesota, so long winters and all of that. But it was only 2 years, so that's okay. The biggest difference between my master's and my current PhD program now, I would say, is that for my master's, I was tagged along to pursue a research project. I have a lot of research interests. But someone else had defined what that research is going to be. Someone else decided what the IRB is going to look like, and I just had to basically do the project. So I didn't feel a big sense of autonomy and self-direction, which is how it should be, because I'm being trained to be a researcher at the master's level. So showing that you're able to complete a research project from start to finish, even though it wasn't your idea, that in and of itself is a master's level skill. However, in the PhD level, you are expected and you're being trained to propose your own idea. So from the very beginning, you are generating the hypotheses. You're the one who is developing the research, and then that is how you attain your doctorate degree. So the main difference for me between my master's and my PhD was a level of autonomy and self-direction that I have now, as opposed to when I had my master's.
Yeah, and I would just say for me, and again, this might be just specific to the programs, but I went from wearing multiple hats without a heavy course load, where I just had big projects due in my master's program, to wearing multiple hats and the course load in my PhD program. And so by multiple hats, if you're on different type of research projects, I worked in my master's program too, and had to do those tasks, and then had classes. And then in the PhD program, I'm still on research projects. I'm still have to work as a graduate assistant. And now my course load, those homework assignments are almost like mini projects in themselves. And so just everything just it's kind of similar to, I mean, I'll tell you, everything comes up a little bit, ranks up in speed a little bit. And yeah, I would say that's the biggest difference.
And then Rachel, did you have, for some reason, I thought you had a master's, or so maybe you didn't. Nope. Okay.
I'm getting it here.
Gotcha. So, so thank you so much, Ameante and Clysha, for sharing kind of the differences between master's and PhD programs. And Sophie, you'll get to kind of have that experience yourself next year when you start the doctoral program. All right. And then I think this is our last like official question. So what would be your top 2 to 3 tips that you would give our undergrads who are thinking about grad school that, you know, what could they do to be successful in grad school?
I'll start off with one. I think boundaries are so important. In grad school, there is never enough time to do everything, and there is always more to do. And it is, I would describe it as a marathon, not a sprint. So there's no point in exhausting yourself, you know, starting week 1. There's certainly maybe times during the semester when you do have to sacrifice a little bit of sleep or a little bit of social time, but that should not be happening every week. And so I wish that I had been firmer in my boundaries my first year, because no one else is going to set those for you.
One of my tips would be don't procrastinate to the end. I think that's a very big undergrad thing, like, oh, like I'm all-nighter the night before. And in grad school, it's like you're playing yourself if you do that, because you're paying for this education and you're about to become a professional and you want to learn what you're studying really well. You don't just want to like read through it and then like take a test or something, which it won't be like that. You'll have to discuss in class what you're reading. So actually like learn, like take in this knowledge that you're given the opportunity to do so, and not just like rushing through it. I like to take my time with assignments so that I'm not like, oh my God, I have, for some reason, all the projects pile up at the same time. I don't know why it is like that, but I'll have like 5 things due at once. And I'm like, I already know, I'm looking at my syllabus and I know, or my syllabi, and I know that all these things are due around the same time. So let me just like pace myself. And that way I feel like I'm giving my best work and not just like speeding through things, because you're about to be a professional. So you want to already put that professional hat on.
Yeah, and I would say, just to add to that, if you feel like your procrastination is rooted in like fear or lack of confidence in your ability to complete the task, I try, for that example, that happens for me a lot, where I'm imposter syndrome and things like that. So I feel like I engage in avoidant procrastination a lot more than I should. And so when I feel myself doing that, I try to ask myself, what would I need to feel more confident, and do that, or seek the support to get that. Because speaking from experience, it never leaves you. I'm on my 3rd degree and it never leaves you. And you always feel like you can't, well, I always feel like I'm not cut out for this. And it's a constant like reminder for yourself of just like, okay, no question is a dumb question. So if you really don't know, reach out to your professor and say, look, I'm having trouble having to do this. And the sooner you reach out, the better, because then the procrastination might not impact you as much, because you've already reached out. And if you find yourself still having trouble, that professor knows that you tried to ask for help. And another one addition, adding to Rachel's, learn boundaries, learn the art of saying no, or I'll get back to you. Let me get back to you on that. Check what I have going on and get back to you. And really process if you can take on another opportunity. Because again, this is my 3rd degree and I'm still learning how to do that, and still blinking and saying, how did you agree to 3 projects? When did that happen? Where did it? And it flows. It just happens. You just say yes and figure it out later. Don't do that. Really just say, I'll get back to you. My last tip, relationship building is key. Always find ways you can leverage your value, because you always bring something unique to the table, and you just have to figure out who you can leverage it to, or who can add value to you, because it really helps in the long run when you do feel like you're wearing too many hats or you're stretched too thin, and you can lean on those supports and those relationships.
Yeah, kind of just echoing onto that, like I find it super helpful having a good relationship to my advisor. If I would feel overwhelmed with something, just telling her and she'd be like, it's fine, we'll work on it if you don't finish something in the given, because I feel like you don't have deadlines as you have in undergrad that they're like, okay, you have to have this project done by then, but more like, let's aim for this and maybe we'll extend it or maybe we won't. So if it really gets too much, you can speak with them. And I think the earlier, the better. But like Rachel said, sometimes you just have to prioritize your mental health. And I think that's something you need to do to be successful in grad school.
And just a little specific tip on top of all of this is that the first draft is usually the hardest draft. Get your first draft done.
And I think to tie some of what everyone has talked about together too in another kind of a specific example, like that relationship building that Clysha talked about and that building of community that Sophie mentioned earlier, like I use my grad student community where I say, hey, Clysha, can we hop on Zoom and have Zoom right now, hopefully coffee, sometime in the future, and have a working hour together where I say, I'm going to work on this first draft so that I'm not procrastinating and you're going to hold me accountable. And because she's part of that community that I've built, she's like, oh yeah, Rachel, I'm there. And by the way, I'm going to work on this draft. So make sure that I actually type at least a paragraph. Okay. Don't let me get distracted. And so that's how all those things can kind of tie together and help you succeed.
Love all those tips that you guys shared. So now you guys, like, what questions do you have for our grad students? If you have general questions, if you have questions for a specific grad student, feel free to unmute yourself, or we'd love to see your face as well on video, or if you're more comfortable with the chat, that's fine too. So what questions do you guys have for our grad students?
Okay, I can go first. Can y'all guys hear me? Just to make sure.
Yeah, we can hear you. Hi, Savannah.
Hi. I think one of the most comforting things I've heard so far is that it's okay to take time off between undergrad and grad, because that's probably what I'm gonna do. But during that time off, do you guys have any advice of like certain things I could do to like either help prepare me for grad school or like to be a better applicant? Not necessarily like after I finish my undergrad, like what can I do during that time off that is productive but still giving me time off from school?
Ask you a really good question, and I'm going to answer that in two ways. First, what you can do during that time, and second, what you can do when you're ready to apply. So during that time, I think Tanya really talked about some of the ways you can, frame if you decide to go travel, or if you decide to do some volunteering work, or you can just tie your activities around a certain value that you have, because these programs, they have certain like mission statements, and they have certain things that they of value, and you can leverage your time off to develop that. So if it's like traveling, you can then frame it as you're developing like cultural competencies and just opening, or you're trying different experiences. You can also volunteer with nonprofit organizations, but still tied within the psychology world. So there are many things that you can do during that time where you are still developing yourself professional and on the professional side without necessarily having to go to school. And the second part is what to do when you're ready to apply. I think for me, when I was applying, I did not address my gaps. So it is important to address the gaps. And luckily the program, they reached out to me and they asked me what happened, like to explain the gaps. And I said, okay, maternity leave, etc. But had I been more upfront about what the gaps are, I think that could have helped ease that tension. So if you just describe it a little bit in your personal statement in a more positive way, where you're the one who gets to frame how you like what you did with that time, that may be a bit more beneficial as opposed to waiting for the program directors to interpret what they might think of that time that you took off.
I agree with that. And Sven, I'll say I didn't think once about school. When I took a break, it's because I needed it. And I was like, I'm done. And I knew I was going to go back to school, and people were like, oh, if you don't go right away, like you're never going to go back. But I was like, that's not true. That's really not true. It depends on the person, I guess. But I didn't think at all. But I guess if I look back, one thing I wish I would have done is maybe intern or shadow, like the specific area that you're interested in. Because I was kind of divided between like clinical mental health counseling and school counseling. And now that I'm in the field, I adore school counseling. I just wish I would have gotten more of an insight, because school counseling has changed so much over the years from when I was in high school to me being a high school counselor now. So I kind of wish I would have gone into the schools and observed a little bit. I don't think it would have changed anything for me, but I do wish I would have just gotten a head start, so that when I started grad school, it was like a blank canvas all over again, for real. So don't feel bad if you don't.
And I think this is another, question that kind of varies on the program you're applying to as well. And so like, I'll echo what Tanya said, where I took time off, or I didn't go straight to grad school and I decided to work instead. But the work that I chose to do, I chose it because I really wanted to work at that job. And so the job that I worked at, I then chose to go to grad school because I really wanted to study at this program. And so those things kind of aligned, and taking time off also allowed me to say like, okay, this job that I thought I wanted right after undergrad, that's not actually what I'm interested in. So now let me jump over a little bit more to this job, and now to this one, and like hopping from job to job that way. And, kind of got me each time a step closer to, okay, and this is the grad program I want to go to. And here's why, because I've had these other experiences that have allowed me to narrow down and figure out this is where I want to be. So I think, honestly, I think it's a strength that you want to not go straight to grad school, but I'm also biased.
Yeah, I will echo that, because I even between my master's and undergrad, I took 1.5 years off and worked at nonprofits, and it really did help me understand like, oh, okay, I want to go back to school to do things better. So, maybe working in that field, you can see, and it gets you re-excited about like, oh, okay, I could go to school and help change this. So yeah.
As someone who doesn't really have a lot of experience, I've got 1 year left, and then I'm going to take 1 year off. Should I try and fill those 2 years with a large array of various experiences, or should I focus on just a few focused long-term experiences to add to that resume, to that list of things I've done on my eventual application? I guess I'm asking quantity over quality, or vice versa.
Quality, I vote.
I agree.
I want to agree, but for me, because I had 2 degrees, I did exercise science and psychology, and I had my research experience in psychology, but I had 3 different internships in exercise science. And for me, it was a lot of quantity, and it really helped me because I could integrate it so well into the program. But I think it was because there was this integration between the 2 fields. So if you want to like maybe have a different interest, maybe try to get both of your interests, like psychology or counseling and the other interests, and then integrate them, because then quantity might help. But otherwise, I would say quality too.
And because everyone else already answered this question, I was just going to add that I think it also helps to tell your professors right now, tell grad students that you run into, hey, this is my interest and this is what I want experience in. Because if you were to tell us right now, I'm interested in child psychology, for example, then I would say, oh, Ethan, let me connect you to this grad student I know, and I'm sure she'd be happy to talk to you about her experiences. So like try, and even if you don't feel like you have that network right now, the more people you tell about, hey, I'm interested in this, I want this experience, they'll say, oh yeah, I'd love to get an undergrad to help me with this. Here, do this. Or let me ask you to help me with this, please.
I'm super excited about all of the information that was shared. Answered a lot of my questions already. Basically, it's just a matter of, I guess, kind of narrowing things down. And, you know, honestly, today I had a moment where, you know, because I looked in my email and I saw the mining for gold and they were reminding us about the application. And I suddenly just kind of got really overwhelmed and was like, oh my God, I don't think I'm good enough, you know, kind of thing. So I think just kind of getting, you know, the mindset that, you know, hey, you can, you know, you can make this happen. You can do this. Like, don't quit on yourself kind of thing is kind of where I'm at right now. So I don't know if anybody's experienced that or not, but.
I know.
Yes,
I think
Lisa.
a lot of us do, yeah. And I know, Clysha, you kind of touched on that earlier with the imposter syndrome and kind of feeling like you don't belong. I think a lot of, if not all, grad students. I don't see Clysha on, if I just don't see her. Maybe she had to pop off, but oh, there you are. But yeah, Clysha, do you want to share any more about just kind of the imposter syndrome or how you've kind of dealt with that, or any of the other grad students too, if you guys want to share that experience?
You know, Lisa, this might not sound exciting, but it's every day. I just got feedback and I got a 70 on my writing, like in a PhD program after, you know, all these years of writing, and I'm still not good, you know. Well, it's not that I'm not good. It's just according to the circumstances or whatever, I have room to improve. And sometimes that's just a hard blow to always be experiencing that blow that you need to improve. But I try to have little affirmations when I feel myself going in that dark place, like today, I won't let doubt get in my way. Today, I'll just sing that in my head. As of lately, I've been doing that every time, just to try to, sometimes you just got to lift yourself up. And when you can't, reach out to people to kind of encourage you and say, what, like, you shouldn't be feeling like that, because it really, it's a daily, for me, it's a daily battle, but it's just always, as long as you get up and try again and keep going, you're going to be, I think you'll be good, and it'll be strong because of it. I hope. We can only hope.
Also, Lisa, I think it's easy to kind of be bogged down by it when you're seeing like all the work that goes into it. You're like, oh my God, 3-5 years of like doing this. But there was like a counselor who said this one expression that I really loved. It was like, how can you eat an elephant? You wouldn't eat it all at the same time. You could never eat it, which, please don't eat elephants, by the way. But it was, her dad would say this, and he was like, you eat it one day at a time. You eat a little bit more. Next thing you know, you finish the entire thing. So it's really, like Clysha said, a day by day thing. Like sometimes, especially at the beginning of the semester, I look at everything that needs to be done and I'm like, I can't do that, no way. But you just work on it every single day. And the imposter syndrome, I mean, I don't think it ever goes away. I just, especially when you're still in school, I hope one day as a professional it will, but it's just kind of this thing where I'm used to seeing like these professionals and I'm like, I'm not them, but then again, yes, I am. I'm on my way. So it's just a process. You know, it won't happen overnight. You won't have to do all these things in one day or 1 week. It takes years. So I definitely say go forth. If you kind of feel something's drawing you to it, like I would say follow that feeling.
The other mantra that I use sometimes is, okay, if you didn't have imposter syndrome right now, what would you do or say? And then whatever my answer is, I'm like, great, do or say that right now. And it sounds so easy, but sometimes even saying that to myself, I'm like, okay, I can send this email then, or I can say this at a meeting. But also I really appreciate you like asking that question, because the more we talk about these things and normalize it, I think the better the outcome for all of us. So thank you.
All right. Thank all of our panelists for being here today and sharing some of your experiences as a grad student. And I hope it was helpful for you guys. And I hope that you learned something new and feel like you know a little bit more about what it's like to be a grad student.